Hello, and welcome to the Dissing My Ability podcast. I am your host, Ken Meeker, certified professional coach and the owner of Vitality Coaching Center. And welcome to Season 2 of the Dissing My Ability podcast. First, I want to thank everybody who has listened, shared, and supported this podcast. What started out as a way to share an interesting story of something that happened with a friend and I, and for anyone who's curious, check out episode 2 of season 1, has turned into one of the things I am most proud of. This podcast has given many people a glimpse of some of the challenges people living with disability face and how those challenges can be overcome. People living with disability often live with a sense of shame, feelings of otherness, and are stigmatized, and too often are denied opportunities to live full and complete lives. Thank you for tuning in and allowing the guests of the show and I to share our stories. People living with disability want the same thing as everyone else: opportunity, to be given a fair chance, to live full and complete lives. And my hope is that this podcast has and will continue to make it easier for people to have those things. I'm opening this season with a little reflection before moving on to some of what you can look forward to in Season 2. On Season 1, my guest Montrese Hardy and I discussed how language can be a major hurdle when it comes to how people living with disability are perceived and spoken about in society. Over time, words go from being acceptable to being insensitive, degrading, and in some cases, just outright insulting. This is especially true for people living with disabilities. We need only look back a couple of decades to find where the use of the word handicapped was the common way of categorizing and referring to people that were living with disability. The differences between impaired, disabled, and handicapped are, as Dr. Sheena L. Carter of Emory University states, quote, "As traditionally used, impairment refers to a problem with a structure or organ of the body. Disability is a functional limitation with regard to a particular activity, and handicap refers to a disadvantage in filling a role in life relative to a peer group," end quote. So handicapped implies that someone living with a disability is less than or has a deficit in ability when compared to the general population. And for this reason, the use of the term is degrading. People living with disabilities should not be defined by any condition they have, just as able-bodied people do not want to be defined by a single aspect of their lives. An individual who requires the use of a wheelchair is not somebody who is wheelchair-bound. Recognizing the harm that can be caused by using certain language is sometimes a challenge for people who are not directly affected by disability. It's important to understand that words have power, whether we want them to or not. It's more important how the receiver of a message perceives the words and the message than the intent of the message being sent. Someone may not intend to cause harm, but once harm is done, intent is less relevant when it comes to stigma and psychological safety. So using terminology that's harmful, it still causes harm, whether it's intended to or not. Some individuals might believe that words are just words, and that changing language to be more inclusive and positive does not address prejudice and discrimination. They are wrong. Societies use language collectively to define and categorize almost everything. So I'm opening this season with a focus on language because language can cause real harm, and it affects the way society views other people. Using positive terminology can have a profound effect on how we see people that are different than ourselves and can help lift away some of the stigma and feelings of otherness. And removing those are exactly what this podcast is about. Recognizing a person first is important in establishing that they are not their disability. It is part of who they are, but it is not who they are. A disability is not an illness, and people that live with disabilities are not patients. People living with disabilities might have a chronic illness or a condition, but they can live full, healthy lives with the condition. And finally, there's a tendency for people living with disability to be told they're inspiring or heroic for simply doing normal, mundane parts of life. I would be a very rich man if I had $1 for every time an Uber or a Lyft driver told me that I'm inspiring. My question is, what about me going from point A to point B is inspiring? I understand the sentiment. They are saying they can't understand how they could do the same thing I'm doing with my disability. These remarks, while intended to be kind, are extremely patronizing. When I do something genuinely extraordinary or special, that is when I want to be seen as inspiring, not just living my life. Unless someone is inspired by everyone doing something like grocery shopping, there's nothing inspiring about me doing mine. I want to eat just like everyone else, so therefore I buy groceries. Simply living life with a disability is not something meant to be seen as inspiring or heroic. It implies that just by being alive, a person has accomplished something. Most people living with disability want their accomplishments to inspire others, just as the same as the general population. People living with disabilities do not want or need pity. We want our lives to be lived as independently as possible. We want to have genuine opportunities for success. We want to thrive and reach our goals by having equal access with as many barriers removed as possible. Remember, 1 in 4 Americans is living with a disability. There's over 60 million people in this country living with a disability. Odds are you know at least one. We are your brothers, sisters, aunts, uncles, parents, grandparents, your friends, your husbands, your wives, your children, and everything in between. So recognizing that language has a direct on how society sees people living with disabilities and how that affects how we see ourselves. We are capable, talented, and yes, sometimes we can be inspiring. But we want to inspire people by what we do, not just for existing. It's okay to ask questions, but please do so with an open mind and a kind disposition. All of us, me included, will get things wrong from time to time. When this inevitably happens, have grace, learn from the mistake, and take corrective action. No one expects perfection, and it's not possible anyway. I'm so excited for this season 2 of the Dissing My Ability podcast. There are some amazing guests coming on whose stories are not to be missed. And if you are someone who lives with disability and are interested in sharing your story, please reach out to me. You can reach me at my email. It's Ken Meeker, KenMeekeraz @gmail.com. Or you can message me through my website, vitalitycareercoaching.com. I want to thank everyone so much for tuning in and for the continued support of the Dissing My Ability podcast. And finally, remember to be kind to yourself and to others. Thank you so much.